It wasn't that long ago that global politics looked completely different. We saw trade wars heating up, old alliances being questioned, and one leader's very unique approach to foreign policy was changing, well, just about everything. So let's break down what that strategy really was and get past the headlines to understand its core ideas.
Think about it. For the most part, the world after World War II operated on a pretty stable foundation, right? You had international cooperation, long-standing alliances, and this general push towards a more connected global economy. There were these unwritten rules, these diplomatic norms that kind of guided how everybody played the game.
But that script, well, it was about to get a major rewrite. A new, and let's be honest, pretty disruptive approach to foreign policy came out of the United States. And it was one that really questioned the value of all those old norms and put a whole different set of goals front and center.
And that brings us to the big question. At the absolute heart of this massive shift was one powerful phrase: America first. But what did that actually mean when the rubber hit the road?
So, first things first, we gotta get a handle on the philosophy itself. This wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was the actual framework that guided huge decisions on the world stage.
Just those two words. Simple, right? But in their simplicity, they became the absolute key to understanding this whole new direction for American foreign policy. It was a crystal clear message to friends and foes alike.
And here's the crucial part of the definition. Instead of working through global groups to find a consensus, the America First idea put U.S. economic and national interests right at the very top of the list for every single international decision. No exceptions.
So this is how that big idea was put into action. The strategy really stood on four main pillars: tightening up national borders, trying to bring manufacturing jobs back to the US, tearing up or rewriting trade deals that were seen as unfair, and, of course, using a powerful military to discourage anyone from causing trouble.
And as you can imagine, people had some strong feelings about this. It really depended on your perspective. Supporters would argue that this was way overdue, that it was all about protecting American workers and key industries from a rigged global system. But critics, they warned that this whole approach could unravel the very alliances and international cooperation that had kept the peace for decades. All right, now let's dig into the first place this really made waves: global trade. This is where the whole America First strategy became impossible for the world to ignore. For so long, the trend was all about free trade, lowering barriers, using groups like the World Trade Organization to sort out fights. This new strategy just flipped that script completely. The focus shifted to using direct economic muscle, mostly tariffs, to get better deals for the United States.
And yeah, the main tool in the toolbox was the tariff. By slapping taxes on goods coming into the country, things like steel and aluminum from a whole bunch of places, the idea was to make American-made products cheaper by comparison and to really pressure other countries, especially China, to change how they do business.
And the effects? They were immediate, and they were everywhere. Tariffs went up, mostly on Chinese goods, all with the stated goal of making America less dependent on factories overseas. And hey, some US industries did see a bump in investment, but it also sent massive shockwaves through global supply chains. Those incredibly complex networks that get a microchip from one country to a finished car in another. They caused a ton of disruption for businesses all over the planet.
Okay, so it was way more than just trade. The America First idea also brought in a totally new diplomatic playbook. It changed how the US talked to its closest friends and its biggest rivals.
Just look at NATO. A central argument was that the US was paying an unfair share for Europe's defense. You had the high US contribution on one side and some allies paying much less on the other. This led to a really public and sometimes tense push for other NATO members to ramp up their own defense spending. It started a huge conversation about who pays for what. But this new playbook wasn't just about allies. It was also about rivals. Instead of using those traditional, sometimes slow diplomatic channels, this approach often went for direct, high-stakes, face-to-face meetings. The meetings with North Korea's leader are the perfect example of this. Supporters saw it as bold, decisive action, a way to finally break through decades of nothing. But critics saw it as a huge risk, something that could give legitimacy to adversaries without getting any real promises in return. It was a total break from how things were usually done. So what does all this add up to? What's the lasting impact of this strategic shift? Because these policies didn't just fade away, they've definitely left a permanent mark on the way the world works. You can really boil down the long-term effects to four big trends. First, countries everywhere are now way more focused on their own economic security. Second, Geopolitical and tech competition is through the roof. Third, there's a huge global debate now about whether globalization is even a good thing anymore. And finally, you see this renewed push everywhere to build up industries at home. These trends are now shaping policy for pretty much everyone.
And that leaves us with one last, really big question. This strategic shift threw a wrench into decades of established norms, and we're all still feeling the ripple effects. The real question now is, how will this new landscape, this world of more competition and more national focus, define the next chapter of our global story? Honestly, that's a story that's still being written.